I think we need to be encouraging people to be sovereign humans, true humans that can trade on their own terms, can be the fullest version of themselves. That's what I want for my kids. That's what I imagine most people want as well.
Hello, I'm your host, Aveline Clark, and this is the 6-Star Business Podcast, where we have conversations with amazing, incredible people all about what it takes to be 6-star, going beyond the status quo, doing things differently, and how they bring purpose, love, and impact into their businesses every day. If ever there was a conversation that spoke to the true heart of what it means to be 6-star, it would be this one, with my guest, Rob Drummond. He's no stranger to 6-star. He's been around since the very beginning, about 2 years in fact. And he was one of the earliest guests on the podcast, back when we had 2 guests at a time. In this conversation, he lets it out, and you can see he's such a deeply thinking, introspective person who really understands what it means to be living at this time in the world, and the beauty of being an entrepreneur and being at the helm of creating your own business to create the changes that we need in the world. He speaks about all of this, and it's a very thought-provoking, interesting, and enjoyable conversation. So enjoy this one with Rob Drummond. Hello, here we are. It's another episode. I'm here with my co-host, Corey Sebest. How are you doing, Corey?
I'm great, and I'm always excited to meet our guests and listen to their stories. So welcome, Rob.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. So good to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, let's get right into this. I want our listeners to get to know you. So could you let us know, first of all, where are you in the world? And then tell us a bit more about what you do, like who do you serve and how do you serve them?
Yep, so I'm in Sheffield in Northern England. I'm not from Sheffield. I grew up near Liverpool, which for people with an ear for English accents might recognise a bit of a twang. But yeah, I basically came to Sheffield as a student a very long time ago, and then we've kind of found our way back here. We like the vibes, we like the culture. It was a deliberate choice to be here, which I think is quite important to me. It's not just somewhere that I've grown up and never left. I essentially run a copywriting training business and agency. So I serve kind of purpose-driven entrepreneurs who are normally in service-based businesses and have a story to tell. And I help them tell their story in their marketing and build up a body of work that is going to attract a steady stream of their ideal clients. And not only that, a stream of people who, when they finally raise their hand and say, yes, I'm ready to do some business with you, I already know I can trust you. I already feel like I know you, even though they've never met.
I love it. I can't wait to get into this a bit more. And tell me, what do you like doing when you're not busy serving people?
I actually, I'm a barefoot runner, which I got into because I'm a runner first and foremost, and then I was chronically injured. Like most runners, I spend 45% of my time injured. So I kept on having knee injuries and shin injuries, and I went to various physios and got a range of advice ranging from take ibuprofen, because there was obviously a shortage of ibuprofen that was causing my shins to hurt, to, do heel raises. And then eventually one guy kind of gave an off-the-cuff remark, and he said, well, you don't really see African runners limping off running tracks, and it's because they spend more time barefoot growing up, and it develops the muscles of the lower leg, and it conditions the foot to kind of, the arch of your foot is very good at landing on the floor and transitioning into the upward spring. And I was like, well, that kind of makes sense to me, because that's going back to first principles. So I started running barefoot in parks in Sheffield in like December, and like I've noticed since, actually, there's more barefoot runners in Sheffield than I realised. It's one of those things where you start to do something and you there's this kind of confirmation bias. but yes, so since then, in summer months, I don't really do it in winter, but in the temperate months, I run in parks and football pitches and that sort of thing, barefoot. That's what I like to do. There's a real connection, there's a real connection to the ground. It's like you start running and you have this kind of memory that you've always known how to do this and you've forgotten how, but it comes back to you. And it's the same as like people go to like visit tribes in the Amazon and they go on hunting expeditions and they have this memory of like, this feels familiar, even though they've never done it before. And it's the same with barefoot running.
That is fascinating. How have you found it on a physiological level and also a mental level, like by doing it differently?
Physiological, definitely. I actually have been injured in the last year, but on the whole, I've not had anywhere near the same amount of injuries. And I've been injured this year just because of self-infliction. It was, I did way too much running and completely violated my own rules of rest and recuperation. So, so be it. But on a mental side, like that is my happy place. And I think if I run for say 30 minutes, it's like one of those things that you kind of ease into and it becomes more enjoyable the more you do it. I also have 2 small kids, so like it's one of the quiet places that I go to not have endless demands.
Yeah, I think we can understand that for sure. Do you run? Do you have a set sort of time or distance that you run like every week, or is it just at whatever you can?
No, I actually don't measure what I'm doing when I run. I just run for the process of running and the engagement of my feet on being on the floor and the process of that. And I run until, I don't know. I mean, so I run in the local park and I normally run a set number of lengths, but I think that's more because I'm a creature of habit and I like to do the same thing every time. And I get stuck into a rut doing the same runs over and over. But it's not particularly because I want to run a certain distance in a certain time. I run for the process of running, not for the arbitrary measurements of doing it a certain amount. Although, having said that, over the last couple of years, I have got into doing more organized runs. So every 3 months, I do either a half marathon or some kind of equivalent. So I've got one coming up in June, which is a big trail run around Sheffield. It's called the Sheffield Round Run. It's a 20-kilometer run around that, and that's really nice to intersperse kind of the private running that I do on the field by myself to have like my quiet time. And it's nice to do a more communal thing where there's other people doing it, and you kind of realize, oh, it's not just me that actually enjoys this. There's a whole community of people who also have these kind of bad ideas. So.
Or
I think it plays into this idea that people, there's more people who are like you than you realize, and all of your quirky habits. Yeah. Like there are people out there who share those quirky habits, and sometimes you might just do it as a hobby. Sometimes you might make it into a business. I think it's just being aware of that.
Well, I have to say, Rob, I didn't know that about you, about the barefoot running. And about a year ago, I got into like following a barefoot runner who does ultra marathons in the UK, and swapped our shoes out. So I have barefoot runners and my kids use barefoot runners as well. So anyway, that is not the topic of this podcast, but it's really funny that, we've known each other for how long, and we've just
never talked about that.
No, we've never talked about that. And so there you go. Very interesting. Right. Tell us about your journey. So I love getting to know people's journeys, and you're a storyteller. So you have the mic, you literally and figuratively have the mic. So I would love you to share with us what's been the journey you've been on. So what journey have you taken to get to where you are today?
I'd like to be able to say that I set out with this grand idea of exactly what I do now. And it's not the case. It's not the case at all. I've always worked in marketing. I'm actually criminally unqualified to do anything else. Like if I decided that I wanted to follow another profession, it would be a huge pain because I don't know how to do anything. So it's almost like having a lemon, and when you're given a lemon, you have to make lemonade. So I was working in marketing. So this is going back to 2012. I was working for a software company. I've always worked in and around software actually, for whatever reason. And I got to the point like I'm not particularly. this is another reassessment of myself. I don't think I'm a particularly religious or spiritual guy, but I'm sort of growing into the fact that maybe I might be. But I certainly got some kind of message where I'd been in the same role for a while. I felt like I was rotting in my chair. I had this like nagging message that was coming down to me, like, it's time to go. It's time to move on. I was following people like Frank Kern. I was following people like Perry Marshall. I was following various people, and I was like, I can just go out by myself. I can just do this. So I told my then girlfriend, now wife Lindsay, that I'm going to quit my job, and she was very concerned about how we're going to pay the bills and whatnot. And I was like, it'll be fine. I will figure it out. So I set out into business as an SMS marketing consultant, selling text messaging services to local businesses, which I thought was a great idea, and it was a great idea, but nobody wanted it. So I ended up really short on cash, really short on cash, and ended up walking around shops in my local town. So I used to live down near London at the time. So I walked around shops in High Wycombe and Beaconsfield, asking shop owners if they would like to talk to me about SMS, text messaging, marketing. The answer to which was no. However, I walked into a hair salon one day and purely by chance spoke to the business owner. And I said to him, "Hi, can I speak to you about text messaging?" About text messaging, and he says, "Well, I don't." He says, "Well, my accountant already deals with my taxes, thanks." And I said, "No, not taxes, text messaging, like on your phone." And he goes, "Well, I don't think I need that, but can you get me ranked on Google in the Google rankings?" And I really needed the money at the time, so I tried to like yawn as nonchalantly as I could manage, and said that I probably could. And that kind of led me to being a Google Ads consultant. So I scribbled out on my business card, I scribbled out Rob Drummond, mobile marketing expert, and penciled in PPC consultant instead. And I went to a local business networking group. I actually met Chris Bantock around the time at the same group. It was a group called the High Wycombe Business Network. And I built up a small Google Ads consulting agency. I managed to establish enough trust with people that I met face-to-face. I think the face-to-face meeting was really important. This wasn't people that had found me online. This was people that I met face-to-face. We had a chat about what they were doing. And Google Ads was quite a good route into business because at the time, a lot of people had phoned Google for help, had lost a lot of money, or had hired an agency or a consultant that had, in some respects, missold them a project. So it was quite an easy thing to kind of step into and fix. And I built up this small AdWords agency. And at the time, I did and still do specialize. I tended to work with businesses who were generating leads for an offline sales process. Often Google Ads people tend to focus on e-commerce because it's all more measurable. It's money in, money out. Whereas I was focusing on companies that were trying to generate inquiries for an offline sales team where there would be kind of a customer journey after the initial conversion and before the sale. And to my eyes, I was working on projects. The projects were going well. We were generating conversions. The cost per conversion as the main metric looked fine. And then every now and again, I get a phone call from the clients, and they'd say, "I'm really sorry, Rob, but these conversions just haven't gone anywhere. So we're going to have to end the project." And I was pulling my hair out over this. I was like, "Well, why have they not gone anywhere? Like, did you not follow up with them? Did you not call them? Like, there were too many factors beyond my control." And I noticed at the time that two of my most interesting clients, who took marketing the most seriously, who took marketing follow-up the most seriously, were using the CRM system Infusionsoft. And that led me down to a rabbit hole of I don't just do things by halves. And that's a kind of entrepreneurial trait that maybe we all share. But so I was like, well, that's very interesting. And I didn't just, go and learn how to use Infusionsoft. I signed up for the full partner training. I went down to London. I became certified as an Infusionsoft certified partner. But my AdWords client who was using Infusionsoft, they were using Infusionsoft to tell stories, and they were training. They ran a business where they trained mountain guides. They took people off to Patagonia in northern Spain and and taught them how to be really, really good mountain guides. But there was a huge gap, if you like, between the AdWords leads that we were generating and adding people into Infusionsoft as the email marketing system, and the point at which someone is ready to say, yes, I'm ready to invest $100,000, take me away to Patagonia. I'm in. So, but all they didn't do anything particularly fancy with Infusionsoft. They just sent a lot of emails. There was maybe about 50 or 100 emails in this sequence, and they told stories. They told stories of people who'd been on the program. They told stories from the founders. They told stories from the mountainside. They told tragedy stories of when things had gone wrong, stories that contained a warning. And I was like, well, that's quite interesting, because it was the stories that were doing the heavy lifting. It was the stories that were building trust. About the same time, to grow my AdWords business, I offered a free lead magnet on my website. And the lead magnet was called How to Waste £1,000 on Google AdWords in No Time Flat, which to date is still my most successful lead magnet. And I think that syntax of title is actually one that works. It's how to waste X amount on your topic in no time flat, or in some time frame. And I used to offer that on my website. This was 2013, so at the time you could still bid on Google AdWords as a term. So I used to bid on Google AdWords, and my little ad had come up, and people used to register for this report, and I used to add them to an email marketing sequence. And I had about a 13-part sequence where I just told some of my stories. It wasn't the same stories that I'm telling today. It wasn't as well thought out, but I just told some stories that showcased who I was, what I stood for. And I noticed that I was getting two types of inquiries. One was people who had just stumbled across my website. They'd searched for Google Ads help or Google Ads consultant or whatever, and I popped up and they contacted me. They normally wanted to know, how much did I charge? And I closed a few of those leads, but they weren't always the best clients to work with. There was actually a few very painful clients to work with as well. The second type of client was clients who had done the search, they'd registered for the lead magnet, they'd been through the email sequence, and then at some point they'd decided, yes, I now know, like, and trust this guy enough to send me a quick email, initiate a project. And it was a night and day experience between those two situations. And again, it was the stories that had done the heavy lifting. I was like, well, that's quite interesting. Over time since then, I've kind of lent my business more and more away from the Google Ads. Like, the Google Ads was always like my trade, and it's the thing that I can kind of fall back on when I need to trade time for money. But what was really interesting to me was the storytelling, because it was like, well, why is this working? And I think it comes back to being a basis of communication and a basis of first principle, in that humans are storytelling creatures. You know, as far as we can tell from the written word, we've always told stories, we've always documented stories. We swim in a sea of stories every day. So it's like, well, it's clearly a foundation of communication, a foundation of how knowledge is passed along from one person to another. So therefore, it's something that I felt was a critical piece in what I was doing. Around the time, I was following a marketer called Sean D'Souza. I don't know if you've heard of Sean, but he's very sharp. He runs a training company, and he ran a storytelling workshop in Amsterdam. And I went along to this, and I would say there was about 20 people at the workshop, and we were all writers in some capacity. You know, some copywriters, some authors. And at the time, I thought that storytelling was kind of a dark art. I thought it was something that I couldn't break down. I thought it was something that I couldn't teach. And it became very apparent that Sean did have a process that he was able to teach, and that we all left the workshop with the same skill. And actually, even though we were all writers, we all stumbled in the same places. We all made the same mistakes. And now that was very foundational to me, because I came away from that realizing that there is a process to follow. There is a process that I could teach. So I got home and I adapted Sean's process with some of my own ideas, and I ran my first kind of storytelling workshop, and I put an email out to my list, which is still mostly a Google Ads list at the time, but three people on my list raised their hand and said, yes, I want to, take part in a 6-week online storytelling workshop. And we just ran through the steps that Sean had taught. And we got about halfway through, and I said to them, "Okay, off you go. Write me a story." And they all got stuck. They all floundered. It was like you could see this like virtual tumbleweed blowing across the screen, and I was like, "Well, so they've all got stuck. So we need to retrace our steps here." And we added in an extra step. So we added in the speedy first draft, which didn't exist at the time when I came out of Sean's workshop. And that's still the process that I teach today. So the process since then hasn't really changed that much, but I've kind of picked out the sort of best parts of different people's teaching, and I'm always trying to ask, can we use this to tell business stories? Because often a lot of the storytelling material that's out there is more geared for people writing novels or plays or literature. And it's like, you don't need to understand everything about the craft in order to tell effective stories. Like, you're already a good storyteller. You're a human. You're already a storyteller by trade. The question is like, how do we tell better? How do we identify the right stories to tell in the right places? And how do we tell them in interesting ways that don't make us sound like the crazy person on the bus that won't shut up, but also reveal enough about ourselves to establish this kind of foundation of trust? The last thing I'll tell you about on my journey, actually. So just after I did Sean's workshop, a business mentor mentioned to me, "Oh, you should probably go and read a book called The 7 Basic Plots by Christopher Booker." And again, I was a bit skeptical because like I knew enough about storytelling craft to know that it could be quite detailed. You don't always need all of it. And this idea of there being a single hero's journey keeps cropping up over and over, or there being X many basic plots. And I have to say, at the time, I was a bit skeptical. It kind of felt like a myth of over categorization. But then going through Christopher Booker's book, he analyzes stories of all forms, going back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, 2,500 years ago. And he asks, of all of the great stories in literature, which ones last? What are the patterns that show up over and over? And what he identifies is, he identifies 7 patterns, 7 plot archetypes that show up over and over. And they all reflect this kind of idea of the hero's journey, but they showcase it from different angles. So like in a tragedy plot, the angle is from the antagonist, because the antagonist is someone like Macbeth is probably the best example. Whereas in, say, a rags to riches plot, say in like a Charles Dickens story, then obviously it's a completely different angle on the hero's journey. And at the time I asked, well, how can we apply these 7 plots? So these plots that show up in literature, if you're writing an epic story, can we apply this to business storytelling? And I told my list at the time, I was going to send an email a day for 7 days, and I was going to send 1 plot every day, and just see how it went. And I felt at the time that for me, some of the stories were easier and more useful than others. And for business storytelling in general, it felt like there were maybe 1 or 2 plots that actually might be particularly useful. So what are the plots that I often use with my clients, where we're trying to pinpoint one story? Because when people opt into your world, when they first buy, when they first encounter you get to tell one story. I mean, this podcast is a bit different because you're giving me the floor to rabbit on. So, but normally you can only tell one slice of the story, and you have to pick, what slice that is. So we want to select the story that has the highest emotional impact, and the story that really reflects a key point of challenge, that illuminates a key insight that you have realized that is important for the customer as well. So often for clients, we're telling either a rebirth story. So a rebirth story could be a rebirth of purpose. In literature, it's like where Snow White literally gets frozen in the hills or whatever. But rebirth also exists for business owners, because we rebirth ourselves constantly as business owners. I think as small business owners, this is one of the things where we can turn on a dime and reinvent ourselves really easily. So it's finding stories like that where you've had a significant change in path, And most of us have those stories. And a lot of the business owners that I work with have a story like that, where they've been in a dark place. They've been in this kind of state of frozen entrapment. And it's like, well, what was the realization? What was the realization that got them out of that? And often we'll put that story at the heart of their marketing, and it really kind of works to, like, people, the right person will resonate with it. So it's finding the right story that will resonate with people. So I set these 7 plots out to my list, and there were some stories that resonated more than others. There were some stories like the tragedy plot, for instance, I don't generally use very often, but the mountain training school client that I had used to use tragedy quite a lot because it illustrated the risks, it illustrated the dangers of being out on the mountainside. So they all play a role, but some of them are more useful than others. So often now what we're doing is we're trying to craft a story about rebirth, or we're maybe using rags to riches. Those are probably the two main ones that we look at. But I'm gonna leave it there and see what you have to say about all of
that. It's awesome. And you've said so many things in there. And one of the things that stood out for me is you said, as humans, we are natural storytellers. And I think the last 5 years where we've seen podcasts explode and more people getting on and starting talking and sharing stories, that's been the case. And also these multi-author books where, like we did one for Six Star, and you had a chapter, Rob, and I was sent one the other day from a colleague and another multi-author book, but on a particular genre. That's becoming, I feel, more and more prevalent. So I feel people are now wanting to share their stories more, whereas 20, 30 years ago, people probably kept their stories a little bit hidden, didn't they? Whereas now
it's a bit of a cultural change.
Yeah.
I want to add on that I'm a better written storyteller than I am a verbal storyteller. Like that is my mode. I write to think and work stuff out, and I like the pace of writing and the fact that I can go back and re-edit and agonize over the words. I've gotten better at telling verbal stories just as a function of practice and running my own podcast and so on. But I think that's also a thing where I've got clients who are the direct opposite. They couldn't think of anything worse than writing the story, but they're great live. You can put them on stage and they're great.
So you're a teacher. So you teach. Do you also write for your clients?
Yeah, I do both. I do both, and it's one of those things where conventional business advice has been to pick one and just do one, and I can't do it because for me they're both two sides of the same coin. And actually the agency work that I do kind of guides me. It kind of keeps you sharp and keeps your hand in, if you like, for the teaching side of the business. And actually for me it is two separate audiences. In some respects, I have quite a different avatar who wants to actually go and write their own story or do that as a service for their clients. That's the other person that might want to participate in the training. For the client's avatar, it's very much someone who is on the stage. They're great on stage. They absolutely do not want to write their story. They've got the email list. They're not emailing the email list. Or they are emailing the list, but they're sending naggy sales emails. They've got this churn going on where they keep on having to add new names in because they're kind of burning the list, and there's this difference in experience between how people experience them when they're face to face or at an event, and how people experience them when they are subscribed to their email list.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I've experienced that a lot with various high-profile marketers. I mean, without naming names, I'm sure we can think of a few.
At what point in the journey, Rob, I suppose the question is, did you have a point along that journey where you had a moment of clarity and went, I'm living I'm on purpose. This is what I was meant to do. I'm so in the right place.
I think it's probably working. I've actually forgotten who the first client was, but nothing really happens until you have a client on board. And until then, it's just ideas and it's pie in the sky. It's you sell something, you work through it, and that's when the rubber hits the road. And it's that, like, for me, there's some interesting things happening at the moment with things like ChatGPT and the AI driven copy. There's some quite interesting things about the output, but for me, my work is very much focused on gathering the inputs, and the key part of the process for me is interviewing, if it's a client, interviewing the client, exploring their story, and then doing the sort of analysis of, like, knowing what I know about their business, what are the kind of threads going through it. A lot of people are kind of jumping to ChatGPT or whatever as a kind of all-encompassing solution. And I think for me, the interesting part is kind of scaling. Like, I don't actually have to write all of the words because I can feed in the right input, and potentially AI can facilitate in the job of providing the output. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it was working on probably a first project and interviewing the clients. It's quite interesting to interview clients because it is a very private interview, and I tell people that, you know, it is confidential, and nothing they ever tell me necessarily has to be used in their marketing. And there's different levels of story. There's some stories that are ready to tell. There's some stories that might be ready to tell one day, and there's some stories that we might talk about, but when we're not really going to use them, and that's fine. And, you know, I've had calls where people have got emotional because, you know, I'm thinking of one client where he told me about his mum passing away, and it was a very emotional topic, and he hadn't voiced that story to anyone for about 20 years because it just never come up. Like, you know, he couldn't talk to his staff about it, couldn't talk to his wife about it, and then it was only the process of going through that. And it comes back to the fact that we're not taught to really delve back into our story and explore the threads. We're taught to be always looking forwards and always be like being more productive and doing more things. It's this level of kind of introspection as well that I think it is really valuable from kind of retracing the steps in your story. So I think going through this, the feedback from all of my clients going through this has been that the process, it provides more than the output that they thought they were going to get.
Yeah, it would be quite cathartic and healing in a way too.
Which is remarkable when it's just talking to me, but I never anticipated that when I got into it. So
how long have you been doing this now for, Rob? When you told your journey, I was trying to work out the number of years.
Yeah, so I started in 2012. I should say actually that I've had 3 stints in employment back in that time. And I think that doing something like this where you're kind of blazing your own trail in some respects, it's not like I just set up my business as a plumber. And I sometimes have days where I'm like, you know what, why didn't I just set up as, like, you know, a builder or something? Like, it would have been so much easier. But it's like, no, it's like I'm trying to blaze my trail, following a passion, and it just takes time. It just takes time. And sometimes you run out of time. Sometimes you run out of money, and you have to kind of retrace your steps and play life on easy for a little bit. And, you know, we've had some other situations crop up. Like I had kids, and then we had the COVID situation. And it's like these things do crop up, and I think to really do something worthwhile, and I think I would say that I'm probably trying to build a business that is, in some respects, I think there's artistry involved in building any business, but there's definitely an artistic aspect to what I'm doing, because it's all about the work. I'm not trying to build a business to sell, and I could never imagine building a business to sell. And that's not to knock that as an option. It just isn't what I personally am interested in doing.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
How important is it, do you think, for businesses, purpose-driven businesses, to share their story, to properly engage their ideal client?
I think it's foundational, because I think without sharing your story, people will always label you. People will always pigeonhole you as being something. So I I come to you as someone who has struggled with this and continues to struggle with this as much as anyone. Like, people pigeonhole me as the Google Ads guy, as the copywriter, as the marketing automation guy, because I did Infusionsoft for a while. And like all of these things like have a grain of truth, but you also get to decide how you want to kind of pigeonhole yourself as well. If indeed you actually do want to pigeonhole yourself. And one way out of that is to tell your story. I think there's challenges about telling your story because you can't just walk up to someone at a business meeting or at a networking event, grab them by the scruff of the neck and just force feed them your story. Like, there has to be a step before that where, you know, you engage their interest by talking about a problem that you can help them solve. And they say, oh, that's interesting. How do you do that? And then you tell your story. So it's not the front end piece. And I see quite a few marketers or quite a few business owners telling these like long personal stories on LinkedIn posts and Facebook posts. And it's fine if that works for you. It just, to me, it isn't where I think your most vulnerable personal stories go, and the ones that are gonna transition you from being a commodity and being a pigeonholed copywriter, Google Ads person, whatever, into being something unique where people perceive you as being a potential solution to a bleeding neck problem that they have, and they only want to work with you because you're the only one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see that there's a lot of people now who are in this space of everyone's talking, you know, people are sharing stories in different ways, and it's social media has brought out this whole new way of being, of just sharing your lunch and your personal stuff. Oh, this is my lounge room, this is my kitchen. So all of a sudden it's like people don't actually know what's appropriate, and there's just this massive, you know, influx of everything on the table. You just turn on any social media channel and you'll get anything from some people. And it's, I think they just haven't figured out what's appropriate, or that there is a natural process of engagement.
It's got to be appropriate for the channel. It's not to say that you can't tell stories about your lunch or about what your kids did to you this morning. It's like, you can tell those stories, but does it need to go on social as the first thing someone sees? Maybe it does go on social as a remarketing ad to people who have previously expressed interest in you, so therefore already know you. That might work. Yeah, I mean, if you're telling stories about kind of more of the day-to-day stories, like, often that works. If you've got an email list, they've had the lead magnet, they've been through the introduction sequence where you've told your carefully selected core story that tells your rebirth story or whatever it is that illustrate your core transformation. They've been through that. They've maybe bought a product or something, and you're just staying in touch because they're in the waiting market. They might buy one day. You need to be sending stuff out to them that continues to remind them that you're there, but illustrates the message that you want to communicate, but it's more of an ongoing touch point. So you can still use those stories. It's just contextual. It's figuring out, well, who are you sending them to, and how much do they already know about you?
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk 6-star. So first of all, what does 6-star mean to you, Rob?
So I'll listen to enough podcast episodes to kind of know that you're probably going to ask this, and I actually want to address why 6-star matters first. I want to start with why. And I think for me, it feels at the moment like we're in a transitional period. So for humans as a species, going back 200,000 years or so, we're quite a young species, actually. We're quite a young and stupid species, actually. In the history of planet Earth, humans have only showed up in the last few milliseconds of time, and we think we're really clever, and I'm not actually convinced that we are. And over those 200,000 years, there's a few kind of inflection points that we're kind of aware of. So kind of looking at the advent of agriculture being one, at the advent of city and city states and people moving into cities being another, the Industrial Revolution being another. Arguably more recently, we now have the internet. So I think at the moment we're in a changing time. a friend and mentor of mine has actually published a book called The Letter from 2100, A Possible World for Your Grandchildren. It's like, well, that kind of really resonates with me, because it's like, well, what world are they going to live in? Like in 2100, I will be gone, but my kids will be 78 and 80, if all being well. So, what world are they going to inhabit? Because it feels to me like we're on a path to some fairly potentially negative outcomes. Either we kind of ignoring, debates about is the world hotting up or not. It feels to me like ecocide and habitat destruction and pollution are very real things, and will remain real things for as long as these are profitable to do. War and endless war will be a thing for as long as the kind of industrial military complex is a thing and demands endless wars, and war is the most profitable thing to do for the biggest of players. And it's like, well, how do we change? And I don't think that changes in these paths, I don't think that changes come from top-down diktats. I think changes come from the bottom up. I think changes come from me, you, as individuals, at individual levels. I think we're kind of due, I kind of mentioned this earlier with like my running and my spiritual messages, but I think we're due a spiritual revolution. I believe very strongly that we need to, whereas rather than increasing dependence on the state or whatever it is, I think we need to be encouraging people to be sovereign humans, true humans that can trade on their own terms, can be the fullest version of themselves. That's what I want for my kids. That's what I imagine most people want as well. So, well, how do we do this? And obviously that's why I think what you're doing with Six Star ties into that, because obviously how you present yourself and your work it's not the complete picture, but it's an important part of that. So if we can build a community of people that encourage this and not only put this into practice in their own lives, but teach this to their kids, teach this to their grandkids. Perhaps being a sovereign human means being able to trade on your own terms and building a business that you love that allows you to play to your unique strengths. Perhaps it also means that you go barefoot running. Perhaps it also means that you learn how to grow your own food. It could be various things, but that's why it's important to me. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that before we get into what.
Well, I wasn't expecting that, and yet, as you're speaking, I'm like, I know why we connected all those years ago. We're so aligned, and I agree wholeheartedly. It is about a better future, and you've just given some clarity and some illumination to what is wrong with the current state and how that better future is being held back. And I think you're absolutely right. Six Star Business is its purpose is to help create a better future. It's to shine a light on the opportunities that businesses can have to do things differently and to be sovereign and authentic.
And to really, really help a group of people that are your tribe, that you want to serve. And it's a mutually, it's not a win-lose situation. Then it's not like you're exploiting someone. It's a win-win situation. So to come back to the question of what does it mean to be Six Star, I was thinking about this earlier, and I keep coming back to Richard Koch, who wrote a book about the 80-20 principle, but he also wrote a book called Simplify. And in Simplify, he says that there are two types of businesses that tend to do extremely well. One is what he calls a price simplifier business. A price simplifier has the economic setup to deliver a reasonable standard of product at less than, say, half the cost of anyone else. So if you think about McDonald's, that's a fairly classic price simplified business. It's very hard to get into because obviously it requires economies of scale and whatnot, and systems and processes and things like that. The other type of business that he was talking about that does very well is what he calls a proposition simplifier. So the proposition simplifier, I think we were talking a bit about Apple and Windows before the call, and I think Apple products are a great example of a proposition simplifier. And his criteria for being a proposition simplifier, the first and foremost is ease of use. It's not the outcome. It's not how good the outcome is. It's how easy is it to use. The second one then is the outcome. Does it provide a great outcome? And then the third one is how artistic or aesthetically pleasing is it? So again, think back to our Windows versus Apple debate. Like, this is where Apple does win, and this is why Apple products have been so successful. Like, regardless of my grumpy opinions and me sticking to my Windows laptop because, you know, I'm a dinosaur or whatever. Like, if you compare it to a Mac, the Mac is easy to use. The Mac does provide a great outcome, and it's definitely more aesthetically pleasing. It's got this artistic factor. So I keep coming back to this in my own work as well, because it's like, well, how easy is it to use? Like, the number of times where I've been through my business and I've provided the better outcome, but I've made it harder to use. It's like, it requires more work. It's more complicated. If you go back to Infusionsoft, if you think about Infusionsoft, like, why wasn't Infusionsoft a proposition simplifier? So, did it provide a great outcome? Yes. Was it easy to use? Categorically, no. Was it aesthetically pleasing? Categorically, no. This is a challenge with most software. It's not to, you know, particularly knock Infusionsoft, because I think a lot of platforms struggle with this, but it's a good example of one that was particularly ugly and not very easy to kind of get into. So in terms of what is 6-star, I think for me it's about experience, but it comes back to this factor of when people experience it, how easy is it to use? Does it provide the outcome that they want? But how easy is it to use? Is it a joy to participate in? It does, and then there's a sort of third consideration: is it aesthetically pleasing? You know, in terms of the 6-star business community, perhaps we send out, like, I don't know, people who join the community get a 6-star beer mat or a mug, or, you know, there's things like that make it aesthetically different to just any other community, for instance. That was the best framing I had for what does it mean to be 6-star.
My mind's just now pausing on the beer mug thing, going, how can I you know, create that? I love it. So, what about doing things differently? How important is it for businesses to be different or be authentic to you? Because obviously, in the work that you do and what you teach people, it's all about them, their story. So they're inherently being different from their competitors by virtue of their own unique story, right?
I think to provide a product or service that is easier to use than anyone else, and if we're arguing that is the primary consideration for a proposition simplifier business, it's like you have to do things differently. It's like when you look at the Apple product, it's like, yes, it's easy to use. It looks so simple, but how many hours? Oh, if you look behind the scenes of what's going on, it's not simple. There's teams, there's iterations, there's all sorts of crazy deadlines. You know, so they were doing things differently. It's not that they were just doing the same thing as everyone else. It just looks like that when people look at the end thing, and it's really it's a joy to use. But it's as a result. I mean, this is why, you know, when we delve into the 6-star paradigm, that you've got all of the supply chain and the other questions behind that, and I'm maybe not the best person to comment on all of that, but the reason it's there is because you have to have these considerations in place, because these are the functional mechanics of doing something differently to make it appear effortless.
What do you think is like one of the biggest barriers today that people would have to becoming 6-star?
I think it largely comes down to mindset and where people are at the moment. So one of my long-term mentors was and still is Perry Marshall, and he talks a lot about head trash. He's actually got a book about head trash, I think. and head trash is his terms for negative stories that you tell yourself. So your story is one of those things where it also kind of runs your life in terms of the decisions that you make or a function of the stories that you tell yourself about yourself. And I think that, to me, there's a paradigm shift that happens. In order to build a 6-star business, the first change that happens has to be internal. It has to be one that changes the story that you are telling yourself. So I think there's some inner work that has to happen first. Like you can't just say to someone, guys, we figured it out. Here's the 6-star business formula. Go off and do it. And actually, perhaps it appears in someone's Facebook feed. It's like, yeah, for $17, we're going to sell you the 6-star business formula. Just send us your email address, complete your payment details, and you'll be away. It's like, it doesn't really work like that. I think there's this inner work that has to happen first. It's like, well, so how do we facilitate that inner work? It's like, well, you invite people in, you create a safe space to talk about it. You challenge people selectively, but you challenge people in a way that is safe to do so in community, and in a community of people who are trying to do this, who are trying to do the same thing. Which I think is for anyone who hasn't been attending the recent events, I think that's what you've been doing with the events recently as well.
Rob, do you think that everybody has an innate capability to become 6-star?
I believe in humans. I believe. I don't believe there are stupid people. I think it's possible to be. I think humans are foundationally unique and brilliant, and I think things go wrong because of circumstance and culture and environments and perhaps upbringing, which maybe isn't a nice thing to say, but I think foundationally, I think we all have it within us to be brilliant, and it just needs to be. It needs to right. It's like just out of my window here. I'm growing a chili plant, and we just had winter in the UK, so I've been bringing it in and nurturing it and trying to keep it alive, and it's trying to create the right situations where it can thrive. Perhaps that's community. Perhaps that's that. Yeah, that could be all sorts of things. I think it largely does come down to community. It comes down to community connection. But again, perhaps I'm an idealist. I don't know.
Rob, what is think about your customers and the feedback they've given you. Has there been a consistent piece of feedback that you've heard from a number of your clients?
And it does my head in, because every time I ask my clients, well, what's it like to work with Rob? And to be fair, I don't ask them directly. I get someone else to ask them, because I think that's very important, because they give different feedback to my virtual assistant than they do to me. But the feedback is always, Rob is logical. And I get this feedback, and I'm like, am I? They're like, I can walk into the kitchen and forget what I walked into the kitchen for. I can go upstairs and forget what I went upstairs for. But they all say it, and it's like, well, yeah, because you can think through a Google Ads campaign. You can actually listen to me. Like you actually do listen to me. Which the other feedback that I get is that I do actually have empathy, which is an astounding revelation to my wife. But I think she confuses sympathy and empathy, which I think are different things. But yeah, it's the logical thing that comes across. Although I think the empathy thing is important, because I think that's the entire basis of helping someone to coax their story out into the open. Like, it has to be this. It's not just an interview that I run with people. It's a dual act of exploring their story. I think is probably a better way of putting it.
It's something that came to me as you were speaking was connecting the dots.
Yeah. I'm a generalist, which serves me at times, because I'm often the best placed person to do various different things. It's also hamstrung my business and meant that finding my groove has taken longer, because I can do a lot of things. It's taken me a long time to realize that I shouldn't necessarily be doing be doing all of those things. But I actually have interest in various fields. Like a friend came around a few months ago because we are chronically messy people, and one of my wife's friends came around and said, "I'm gonna come around and help you tidy up." And she was looking at all of the books I've got on the bookshelf. She's like, "You got books about like ancient Greece. You got books about psychology. You got books about." I was reading a book about from George Orwell the other day. So it's very eclectic, but I read all of these different things, and I see the threads popping. I see the same threads coming up, and it's connecting different ideas. And this is where you get breakthroughs. You don't get breakthroughs by just working by sitting in the same pool. You get breakthroughs by exploring different pools and pulling in new bits of information from elsewhere that, when you combine it into the whole, creates something completely different.
And that's your genius.
I hope so.
I believe so. I do. Just in the way that you even speak about it. It just is so clear. Would you agree, Paul? Right?
Definitely. I mean, I know now why you didn't pursue the plumber career. Yeah, and preferred to.
Yeah, because people would hire me as the plumber, and before you know it, the plumber's trying to like also do the driveway, and like, it just wouldn't really have worked, I think. So,
for me, still is the question if people are ready to tell their story, which is a kind of an outing, I would say, right? Because it's something personal they carry outwards. Is there not also a little bit of hesitancy and fear involved to step out of the mess, the crowd of peers, and showing up as a different individual person?
this is the main pushback I get from clients.
Yeah.
And a client has to come to me and they've decided that this is the other thing that's hamstring my business, because people have to come through, they have to read my book, they have to listen to some of the podcast episodes that I run, and eventually they realize, oh, actually, I do need to tell my story, and this guy can help me tell it. But they have to get to that point. If they've just found me and been introduced, there's a lot of defensiveness about like, we're so used to just talking about features and benefits and the functional stuff. And it's not to say that you can't talk about those things, but you can't. But you're going to be a commodity if you only talk about features and benefits. So they have to kind of get to that point. I tend to work. I don't know why, because I've never put this on my website, but I tend to work with like nerdy, middle-aged, often men who often have technical backgrounds in some kind of IT-related field. I don't know why that is. Like, I just seem to give off the vibes that attracts that kind of clients, and often it is even more of a struggle to. Like, you have to do there's definite skill to doing the interview or the exploration of their story. Like, you have to create this environment where they feel comfortable to explore it, and they kind of forget it in interview, and you're just having a conversation about things that have happened in their past. So I always start off the interview by asking them to talk about their current business, a bit like what you did on the call today. Like, we started off talking about my business and my current line of work because it's a safe question, and it encourages them to start talking. Once they start talking about that, then you can kind of ease backwards into the threads. I don't start off the call. So someone's decided that they want to tell their story. They're a bit nervous about it. They're not sure about, putting this out into the wild. And the first question that I asked them is, right, tell me a rebirth moment. When have you really struggled? When have you really felt like shit? No, we don't lead that. Yeah. So there's real nuance to it, I think, and I think it just comes with practice. I also think that it's very hard to do by yourself. And every time I'm currently in the process actually of like reworking my own, what I call my own core story sequence, because I'm endlessly not happy with it. And it's about 5 to 10 times harder to work on my own story than it is to work on someone else's, because I'm too close to it. It's like there in front of your face, to the point where if you try to look at something that's just in front of your nose, you can't see it. Like, you can't focus on it because it's too close. So there's this problem of like proximity as well. That
Did you ever had a client who wrote back, said, I can't do it, or were close but overcome by fears and said no?
No. So the only time I've ever really come unstuck was because when I'm interviewing, normally I'm interviewing a person who's going to be the single voice of the business. So I'm interviewing the founder or business owner, and it's their voice that's going to be in the marketing. It's their name that goes on the marketing emails. But it's not always the case. Sometimes there might be multiple people who contribute to the comms and showcase different areas of expertise in the business. So there was one example a few years ago where I sold the project to the main business owner. He'd read the book, he'd listened to the podcast, he'd come through the process. He was like, yes, I'm interested. So I worked with him, but then he also brought his co-founder into the project, who had not read the book, had not been through that. He was just told that we were doing this story interview. And then I started the interview with him, and we got to the point where we were asking personal questions, like more personal questions. And he's like, I'm just not comfortable talking about this. I don't see how we're going to use it. I don't get it. And at the time, I mean, I salvaged the call, but we had to completely change track, and we had to just talk about what to him were safe stories about the more recent stories that affected his direct line of work. That's the only time it's really come unstuck, and this is why people, if people are going to be kind of engagement like on a client basis, that they have to go and read the book first. It's really a prerequisite. As long as they followed the steps, or as long as I haven't taken any shortcuts, which is the other risk when I need to sell some projects and I shortcut my own processes and end up working with clients who then aren't yet ready to share. That's the other situation that perhaps can come unstuck. But
And how did this type of outing, by telling their story and becoming the authentic me, change their life, their business life going forward? How did you experience that? What type of feedback did you get from your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I've got one client, and he ended up. So I think another thing to say as well is, like, often when we're exploring someone's story, and then what we kind of do is we kind of document it. We actually document it into an Airtable. So there's a documentation of these are all the stories that you might tell, and this is how it might link to content. Often what we're doing is we're creating an email sequence, because that's an email being a warm medium. It's after someone has opted in, but it's before the sale. But it doesn't actually have to be that. It's not kind of media agnostic in terms of how you go about telling it. So I've got one client where he did that. He's got the email sequence, but he then just put all of his stories on his website, which was quite a different. Before that, he had a much more professional brand, and he still has that in some respects. But for people then who want to, because what he found in his web analytics was that people arrive on the website, but then they go to the about page, and the about page is then the gateway into his stories. And he said that he had one guy who went to his about page, delved into his stories, read all of his stories in one go, emailed him, told him so, and that is now his best client. I was like, well, that to me is a case in point of that's the transformation in action.
I love it. Love it. I'm just looking at the time. How did we talk this long? I just love it. We get carried away and swept into this little bubble, and time, I thought it stood still. Look, I would love to hear from you, Rob. What advice or piece of nugget, or maybe a step that you can give someone if they wanted to start this process? What do you advise?
So thinking about the avatar who, I think you need the right people in the right roles. You need to figure out, are you the writer or not? Do you want to? And we were talking about ChatGPT earlier, but like there's options for doing this. It's not necessarily that you have to outwrite all of the words, but what I try to get people to think about is you need various roles. So you need the business owner. So you will be the business owner. Then there's the systems expert. There's the person who knows Keep or Infusionsoft or ActiveCampaign, or the person who can get the most out, the person who can recommend the right tech stack, implement it, and get the most out of it. Then there's the copywriter. There's the person who's actually going to understand the stories, put the words on the page. So in my business, I sit in all three roles. I'm the business owner, I'm the systems expert, so I use ActiveCampaign and some other products. And I'm also the copywriter. And that's fine if you decide that you want to sit in those three roles. But you might be listening to this and think, well, I only want to sit in one of those roles. And I think ultimately, as time goes on, most of us ends up just sitting in one role. If you're the business owner and things are really growing, even if you, so I think Perry Marshall's a great example. So Perry is also a very, very good copywriter, but he now doesn't write most of the copy that goes out in his emails. And he's another good example because he sends a daily email. It's quite story focused, but he works with a guy called John Fancher, who has been working with for years, and John has captured his voice and listens to Perry and converts Perry's words into the emails that goes out to the point where people can't tell whether Perry's written it or John's written it. So Perry is no longer sitting in the copywriter role. So you've got to have the right people in the right roles, and you've got to. It comes back to understanding yourself as well, because there's no point you swallowing all of the storybooks and so on and trying to learn the craft if you just don't really want to do it. And then obviously then you need to have the right copywriter. And that's not to say that I'm the right copywriter. What I'm trying to do is build a community of copywriters that serve different people in different ways. If someone runs a business that's in the beauty industry, for instance, and they're based in the States, like I'm probably not the right writer. If they're an IT consultant based in England and they're middle aged and they don't want to tell their story, then that's probably more my pond. So it's having the right writer. It's not just having any writer. It's got to be the right writer as well.
Great advice. Corey, have you got any final comments or questions for Rob?
I love his niche business he's having, in particular in today's world where everybody still competes with everybody else, where you are able to offer kind of a gateway to yourself to be you, because trying to be you doesn't leave enough time to compete with others, right? Because you're focusing on yourself to be of better serve to your clients and to your customers. And I think this is wonderful.
I'm trying to collaborate with more copywriters at the moment, partly because I want to build my community, and when you delve into it, we all service people in slightly different ways. So I'm trying to collaborate more with other writers because we don't collaborate. It's not a collaborative industry. It's not like other industries, like maybe IT, for instance, where collaboration is much more common. And it's a shame. And it doesn't have to be like that. And it creates a situation where people hire a copywriter, it's a bad experience, the copywriter charges them a lot, vanishes off the face of the earth. And I don't think it has to be like that. I think if we focus on the copywriting angle as an industry, I think we can level up.
Yeah,
and that comes from a collaborative mindset and operating the business on a collaborative basis, on the basis that I am unique, I'm the right person for certain people, and I can just collaborate with other people who serve other people in different ways. And
that is a very 6-star approach. That's what we talk about. It's what we advise and recommend that people adopt this mindset and this way of being, and you're living it, which is awesome. Perfect. Yeah, it's great. As we come to a close, Rob, how can people get in touch with you?
So my website is storycopywriters.com, and you'll be able to find my book there. So as I've said, if you want to work with me, you have to read the book, you have to go through the podcast. So there is a bit of a journey. Storycopywriters.com is the place to go. My book is called Simple Story Selling. If you search Amazon or search a book, so if you don't like Amazon or wherever you buy your books from, find Simple Story Selling, and that's my book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob, for your time. Thanks for the journey of this conversation, for you sharing your stories. There's so much that came from this, and I'm really looking forward to listening to it again. So appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.